Monopoly for the NES is perhaps my favorite adaptation of the board game. If you've had the misfortune of playing the currently available Monopoly games on console, like the one made by Ubisoft that demands you sign into their Uplay service for some ungodly reason, then you'll know what I'm talking about. The pieces move like molasses, the interface is somehow more complicated than ever, and the animations are uninspired. I mean, they don't even visualize the world of the game, they just add slightly animated trinkets to the existing board, in ways that feel less like a miniature world come to life, and more like animated GIFs in a Discord chat. With that out of the way, what is it about the NES Monopoly game by Sculptured Software that's kept me hooked for all these years? Full disclosure, I have no nostalgia for this particular version, although I've always been a big Monopoly fan. Here's me at the Strong Museum living my dream of being in a real-life Monopoly jail. I was a big board game kid, but in terms of a digital port of Monopoly, the only one I ever played was the excellent Westwood version for Windows 95, so I didn't discover the NES game until years later. And whereas most other adaptations go for spectacle and flashy graphics, this one doesn't look like much of anything. It is extraordinarily literal, just the board and a few pictures. But herein lies the brilliance of NES Monopoly. Simply put, this game is fast. It is certified nonsense-free. The AI players cling to their properties with clenched fists, making trades darn near impossible, which all amounts to a game that's all about the dice rolls and property management. In this video, we'll get into why I love the NES version of this game, and how it became my go-to adaptation of Rich Uncle Pennybags' Square of Economic Suffering. Welcome to Computer Lab Hijinks, a show about games, old software, and web ephemera. Let's dive right in. In glorious 256 by 224 resolution, Monopoly, also labeled on the cartridge as Action Video Monopoly, recreates the board game through a few simple menus, a dice rolling animation, and pixel art recreations of the chance and community chess cards. It supports up to 8 total players in any combination of human or AI, and all with a single controller that players can pass around. It is, as I mentioned earlier, incredibly fast. Player sprites zip around the board, property buying animations happen in less than a second, and when a card sends you to a specific property, you don't have to watch some Peter Jackson epic about the character's journey across the board, you just warp there. What little graphical flair exists is always second to that relentless speed. But having said that, the visuals are still incredibly charming. The auctioneer gyrates back and forth. The bankrupt Uncle Pennybags eats fish bones out of the garbage with a 5 o'clock shadow to boot. And houses are built by a giant hammer, or a regular-sized hammer with miniature houses, but I like to imagine the giant hammer. And that's about it. There isn't much to say about the gameplay side of things because this is a no-frills, straight-to-the-point, black coffee with your morning newspaper kind of adaptation. It's Monopoly, and it does what it says on the tin. There's no alternate boards, no options for house rules, just the actual game from the instruction book. Looking at the reviews of the time, on release, Nintendo Power teased their upcoming review in the April 1991 issue, Extra, Atlantic City moves. Buying is the name of the game with all properties, but some groups are more expensive to develop than others, and their payoffs vary too. Yeah, it's just 6 pages of explaining the rules of Monopoly. There's even a section on the probability of dice rolls. 12 and 2 are the least commonly rolled numbers. The odds are that you'll roll 12 once in every 26 throws. The most commonly rolled number is 7. Riveting. Electronics Gaming Monthly opens with a pretty good summary. There's not a lot to rate here, either you like the board game Monopoly or you don't. Further down the page, the most critical review offers an interesting point. Third-party NES games went for roughly $30 to $35 at a time when the actual board game was available for $10. So that extra cash was the price you'd pay for all the gimmicks and flashing lights and sound effects, which, as we've established, are pretty sparse. One of the more positive EGM reviews also mentioned that they still preferred holding physical Monopoly money when they played, which is undoubtedly an iconic part of the board game. In fact, when I reached out to the biggest Monopoly fan I know, he said the following: "I'd rather die than play digital. I want to feel the cash against my skin." Phrased weirdly, but I get what he's saying. But despite being a fairly literal translation of the board game, NES Monopoly still had to make some adaptational maneuvers because Monopoly is a deceptively tricky game to convert. So for the second part of this video, I want to look at the challenge of bringing a game like this into the world of pixels and computer code, and the choices this game happens to make. First off, there has been no shortage of Monopoly video games, with the Wikipedia page listing over 30 unique versions and the NES version appearing at number 3. It's worth asking, how did Sculptured Software get it right so quickly? When it comes to translating board games into software, I'd argue there are two main challenges: visualizing the imaginary world of the board, and interpreting the rules in a concrete way that removes social engineering, or at least finds a way to reduce those social elements into programming variables. We've already covered the graphics, of which there are very few, so let's take a look at the second one. Monopoly is, of course, a game heavily reliant on luck. The first few trips around the board are a fairly low-stakes quest to acquire properties, with the second half focusing on trades, housing monopolies, and hastily selling off assets at a 50% loss to build up other properties that will hopefully prove lucrative. Simple mechanics like jail start out as an annoyance, but later become a safe place to sit and collect income once the board fills up with risky dice rolls. Most of these mechanics are changed in some way by the move to software, because the original rules were written to exploit human error. For example, if a player forgets to ask for rent when another player lands on their property, then no rent has to be paid. That's an actual mechanic in the Parker Brothers rules for the board game, and this brings me to the big plot twist of this video, which is, you're probably playing Monopoly wrong. As Amanda Cody says in an interview with the University of Oregon's YouTube page, quote, "Think about something like Monopoly. Read the actual rules, think about how your family actually played it. Nobody plays Monopoly according to the real rules. What does it change or do when you play your way versus via the actual rules? Most of us make Monopoly a much slower game than it should be." Some diehard Monopoly fans are aware that putting cash under the free parking space, for example, is a house rule. But a surprising amount of players aren't aware of the auction system, at least until they play a computer version. Very basically, because of its enormous success as one of the most popular board games in the English-speaking world, Monopoly has become defined by a word-of-mouth explanation of the rules. And this is the more abstract reason that the game is tricky to adapt. But it's also kind of missing the point. Popular board games aren't really about the game or its rules or who wins. They're about structuring a conversation. Like parlor games of Victorian England, off-the-shelf board games are a way to kill time with people you don't know well enough to enjoy a silence with. So if you take the interpersonal and human aspects of these games away, then video game adaptations of board games are what you're left with. It is fundamentally a different game when played against computer opponents with instant virtual banking than it is with 4 humans sitting around a table struggling to calculate 20% of a player's net worth as they hit the income tax space. Whereas the board game is somewhat notorious for starting countless arguments at the family Thanksgiving, this just isn't the case with the somewhat hyperbolically named Action Video Monopoly, where Rich Uncle Pennybags sprints across Go, his legs stretching toward the camera like he's in a Beastie Boys video. When it comes to Monopoly on the NES, this is just the game, with its regular rules and nothing more. And for that reason, I love it. It's a no-frills, no-nonsense adaptation that delivers on its central premise. This continues to be my favorite version of the game, and it runs great on the Hyperkin clone hardware with a pretty great controller. Loose copies of the game are still charting for around $8 on eBay, making it one of the cheapest forms of Monopoly in a surprising twist. There are, of course, many other ways that developers have imagined the world of this game in the ensuing years. So we're going to look at one of my other favorite adaptations in the coming weeks, which is Westwood's Windows 3.1 version. But for now, thank you for watching Computer Lab Hijinks. I'm Nathan, telling you to keep your files safe, keep your passwords managed, and for goodness sake, don't click on any strange links. We'll see you in a couple weeks.